So many parents are in financial distress due to the high cost associated with education. One of the big ticket items is school uniforms. The Competition Commission has been investigating alleged collusion in the awarding of exclusive school uniform contracts by suppliers or to suppliers by schools. For more on this progress that's been made so far by the Competition Commission, we're joined by Commissioner Thembinkosi Bonakele. A very good afternoon to you, Commissioner, and thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
This probe into the school uniform issue and the unfairness of some of the arrangements goes back to 2016. How much ground has been covered since then?
Well, it's one of the biggest probes because you can imagine the number of schools. Investigation for prosecuting the large suppliers and some of the large schools, particularly the private schools. So that investigation is quite advanced. We were at the tribunal towards the end of last year. The tribunal asked us to do more work, so we should be going back to the competition tribunal for prosecution and or settlements in January sometime. But also other work involves talking to government. So for example, we've issued a guideline to government which has been now circulated to all the schools by the Minister of Basic Education, basically guiding schools on how to procure uniform in a cost-effective manner.
That is intervention on the government side. What about the private schools there? What can you do there to make sure that the playing field is leveled?
Well, the private schools are also part of the schooling system, so they are bound by the Basic Education Circular, which has now been issued. But more than that, we can also prosecute, because some of these exclusive supply agreements for school uniform are unlawful. They contravene the Competition Act. So in those instances, we can prosecute those companies involved, that is the companies that are running private schools. These are the cases that are currently before the tribunal.
How accurate is your assessment then, Commissioner Bonakele, of just how widespread an issue this is? Do you have figures?
It's quite widespread and it varies. But we are finding that the more traditional established schools, so your former Model C schools, private schools, there tends to be a close-knit relationship between the schools and the suppliers there. In the more general public schools, sometimes people can buy uniform in towns and they can shop around from one or two shops, but the exclusivity tends to apply more generally in established schools.
How then have schools explained that proximity that becomes problematic? Do they get into these agreements because they are perhaps ignorant of how it disadvantages other players in the industry, or do they act with nefarious intent, so to speak?
There certainly has been a great deal of ignorance. You know, I spoke to one school principal and I asked him, how long have you had this supply relationship for this school uniform supplier? He said, well, ever since I was a student at this school myself, since I started at primary school, we've had this supply arrangement and we never thought there was anything wrong with it. So you can clearly see that there are instances where it's just a matter of education because there's a lot of ignorance. But there are instances where we are worried of the proximity between the officials, like school principals, governing bodies, and some of these suppliers.
A lot of parents listening to our conversation are listening in after paying a fortune for their children's school uniforms, and what they will want is to see your office as the Competition Commissioner come down hard on those who've fallen short of what the law is saying. So what penalties do the schools face, and also how are suppliers being held to account?
We are focusing on particularly big suppliers and some of the big private schools. Because it's not a question of just punishing schools, it's a question of changing behavior. And the governance of the schooling system, as you would know, does involve parents. So part of the message is for parents to be involved in decisions about how to procure uniform and even prescribing uniform, because that goes a long way in determining the price of school uniform. What kind of prescriptions do you have? What sort of exclusivity in uniform do you have? So it's got to be a combination of punishing those who are engaged in wrongdoing, educating those who are ignorant, but also getting those who are responsible for governance playing their role, including parents.
Another issue of interest extends to some of the other supplies that go with schooling and textbook suppliers have also been called into question by some.
Yes, last year we uncovered this cartel on school book publishers. And essentially, they are engaging in cartel conduct targeting departments, so the provincial departments and some of the centralized procurement by the basic education department. They would agree on the prices they would pay, even the authors for some of these school books. Actually, one of the most concerning things about this arrangement is that they are also seeking to prevent the emergence of online publishing of books and things like study guides and so on. So you can clearly see this is an established industry, and the cartels has been running since the 1980s. They now can see that there is a potential for entrance in online publishing and so on, and they're exerting their control of the market using the platform that they currently have, that is dominance in the publishing of hard copies.
Given the sophisticated nature of this collusive behavior, when does it become corruption, and when does it then get referred, perhaps by your office or any other body, to the likes of the Hawks and the police for investigation?
It certainly is corruption, and we've been calling upon law enforcement agencies to be involved in some of the major cartel investigations that we do. Remember that colluding to fix the price, we call it price fixing. Somebody else can call it fraud. Somebody else can call it corruption. So it doesn't matter for me, semantics. The point is we've got to stamp it out, particularly where it affects the most vulnerable, parents and schools and so on.
Often the recommendation or the action that follows your investigations would be a company admitting wrongdoing, they pay a fine, and we move on. But would jail time not be a more useful measure against companies that fall foul of the law?
Certainly, and that's why we have to work with other law enforcement agencies, the criminal prosecuting authorities, because the law does allow us now to send people to jail. But these are sophisticated investigation and complex arrangements. So, for an example, in the publishing sector, we are looking at more than 91 companies that are involved. So it's not an easy investigation, and the scale is certainly very wide.
And what about timelines? Do we have dates of when you expect to firstly deal with the issue of the uniforms themselves and the one on the publishing of the textbooks?
School uniform is going to be longer. Prosecutions, we are doing them now. As I said, we are before the tribunal as we speak. We also have to change the conduct, and that takes longer. That involves us talking to schools, talking to government departments. So it's going to be a multi-year project. But the textbook price-fixing arrangements, we've got to stamp them out, because that's pure criminality, that's pure wrongdoing, and those prosecutions should be coming up earlier in this year.
Commissioner Bonagala, thank you so much for your time.